They said the year was 1549, but it felt older than time itself. The sky above London was the color of lead and sorrow, heavy with secrets too ancient for scripture. Through the slanted streets and moss-lipped alleyways, rumors scurried like rats, quick, dirty, and impossible to catch. Whispers told of a man with the king's voice, the king's bearing, the king's very blood. And yet he was not the king. At least not in any way that history would care to remember. His name, or the name he gave, was Thomas Grey. A name so plain it might have been forged from ash. He appeared as all men do when they intend to vanish. Quiet, deferent, and dressed in the kind of garments that neither invited curiosity nor remembered the touch of wealth. But his eyes, they betrayed him. They held the peculiar stillness of someone who had spent too long watching people pretend to be themselves. He first emerged in the taverns east of the Thames, reciting tales that only one born in the halls of royalty should have known. The way the king's chamber smelled of rotting lavender in winter, the pattern of bruises on Queen Jane's wrist, the secret phrase whispered by Cardinal Wolsey when drunk. No bard or drunken fool could mimic the cadence of such recollections. They were too precise, too intimate, too bitter. Soon his audience grew from beggars to bankers, from whores to knights. They came not for entertainment, but revelation. Thomas spoke not of a king, but as a king. And when he lifted his hand, they listened as if a crown gleamed from his brow. The story, of course, becomes slippery here, as stories often do when truth begins to buckle under its own weight. Some said he was the bastard son of Henry VIII, born in the dark corridor between sin and statecraft. Others believed he was Edward VI himself, switched at birth by a dying midwife bribed with eternal salvation. There were even those who swore he was no man at all, but a revenant soul, back to claim the throne that destiny had denied him. But beneath every theory throbbed the same unspoken question. Why did he know so much? Why did he wear grief like an old uniform, tailored and blood-stained? A document, fragile, half-burned, was found in the wall of an abandoned priory near Norfolk. It bore the seal of a royal physician and the trembling ink of panic. The child born in shadow has eyes to knowing. He must not live. If he does, the throne is no longer ours. The parchment was unsigned. Its ink faded like the last breath of a hunted man. But the timing aligned too perfectly with Thomas Grey's whispered origin. He never claimed the throne outright. That, perhaps, was his greatest deception. He let others declare it for him, as if reluctant to touch the blade of fate himself. Yet wherever he walked, people bowed, not because he demanded it, but because their knees seemed to collapse in awe. Peasants hid coins with his likeness under floorboards. Old lords who once spat at Henry's bastard now drank wine to Thomas's name. The idea of him grew heavier than the man himself, and still, he moved like a shadow watching itself. He smiled like someone who had nothing left to lose, as if every moment he lived was stolen from another man's destiny. One cold evening, as fog clutched the rooftops like a starving widow, he was approached by a girl no older than 10. Her hair was matted, her hands stained with soot and sickness. She stared at him with the unwavering gaze of the condemned. "Are you my king?" she asked. He knelt, his cloak folding like wings of mourning around his knees. "Do you need me to be?" he replied. That night, 7 men were hanged for speaking his name aloud in a brothel. This was no longer a tale. It had become a plague of belief, and the crown, that wretched golden cage, began to tremble on the boy king's head. There is something terrifying about a man who asks for nothing, yet draws the world toward him like a wound draws flies. Thomas Grey had become such a man, not through violence or decree, but through the slow and silent seduction of memory. For in him, people did not see a claimant. They saw a correction, a whispered apology from history itself. By the summer of that same year, the countryside had begun to rot with loyalty. In Wiltshire, a band of shepherds refused to pay tax to the crown, declaring they recognized only the silent king. In York, a judge was found with his tongue removed and the words for the true heir carved into his chest. The court called it treason. People called it prophecy. Thomas did not hide. He walked among them, through market stalls and plague-worn parishes, blessing children with a gaze, not words. It was said that when he entered a village, the bells rang on their own. Old women wept as if seeing their sons return from war. In one chapel, he was offered bread by a priest who had gone blind 20 winters ago. It claimed he could see clearly now that the true light had returned. But Thomas, oh Thomas, carried all this like a curse draped in velvet. His sleep, what little he allowed himself, was haunted. He often spoke to no one in particular, murmuring names as if reciting a litany of the dead. Anne, Elizabeth, Catherine, Edward. He was not seeking justice. He was mourning justice that never lived long enough to grow old. John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, the real power behind young Edward VI's throne, saw in Thomas not a man, but a symptom. A fissure in the wall that held England together. He ordered spies, then assassins. One was found weeping under a tree, convinced Thomas had looked at him and known the name of his unborn child. Another slit his own throat before reaching the city gates. Only the third reached him. And he returned broken, without injury, speaking in tongues until he starved himself into the earth. They could not kill what they could not comprehend. It was around this time that the image began to spread. A coin, not minted, but carved, passed from palm to palm like a secret. One side bore the Tudor rose, the other, a face not of any known monarch, but eerily familiar. The carving was rough, imperfect, but the eyes were unmistakably his. People began burying these coins in the foundations of their homes. A new superstition, or perhaps a new faith. They called it the seal of the forgotten. And as belief thickened into doctrine, London grew fevered with dread. God. The Privy Council convened in secrecy, speaking of Thomas in tones reserved for plagues and demons. Some argued for his arrest, others for his erasure. The burning of every tavern tale, every face that dared recall his name. But the oldest among them, Lord Sheffield, said nothing until the end. Then, in a voice like splintered ice, he offered only this: "It is too late. The people have remembered him into existence. What does a kingdom do when its people believe in a different king? They tried silence. But silence, when aimed at a ghost, only makes it louder." One night, a printing press caught fire in Southwark. The flames revealed dozens of hidden leaflets, each proclaiming the king walks without his crown. No names, no addresses. Just that single heretical sentence repeated like a prayer. By dawn, the same sentence had been scrawled across the walls of Parliament, the Tower, and even the Chapel of Westminster. Edward VI, only 12, and already shriveled by illness and paranoia, demanded to see Thomas with his own eyes. Dudley forbade it, but children, even those with crowns, are rarely denied curiosity. And so, a meeting was arranged, unrecorded, unguarded, and drenched in silence. What passed between them is unknown. Some say the boy wept, others say he laughed. But all agree on one thing. After that night, Edward refused to speak the name Thomas ever again. And yet, the next morning, a single golden crown was found lying atop the statue of St. George. Just outside the palace gates, no one saw who placed it. But it was not the royal crown. It was older, dented, and slightly too large. Some whispered it was Henry's hunting circlet, missing since his death. Others believed it had never belonged to any monarch. Until now, Thomas Grey never touched it. But for the first time, he paused when he saw it. And in that pause, history took a breath. Sharp, cold, and trembling. Autumn bled into England like rust into old iron. The leaves fell not in golden glory, but in bruises of ochre and brown, as if the land itself mourned something it could not name. Thomas Grey, the man whose name now moved through whispers like smoke, withdrew from the city's gaze, did not vanish. No, vanishing is for cowards and saints. He merely shifted, like a mirror turned to reflect nothing. He took residence in an abandoned manor outside Canterbury. No banners, no guards, no sermons. Only silence and the occasional scratch of quill on parchment. Those who sought him found no court, no throne, only a man who had grown thin with purpose, and whose eyes bore the weight of decisions not yet made, and yet they came. The broken, the dreaming, the loyal and the damned. They came carrying gifts, not of gold, but of memory. An old soldier brought a letter from Floddenfield, signed by a king long buried. A nun carried a tooth she swore belonged to Anne Boleyn. One child offered a lock of hair he'd kept hidden since the queen's execution, claiming it had never grown gray. They came not to beg for power, but to deposit belief, as if Thomas had become a reliquary for a past the world had disowned. But Thomas himself, the man beneath the myth, was unraveling. He kept journals. Pages upon pages of half-thoughts and lamentations. "I do not know where I end and the idea begins," he wrote. "They kneel for a ghost I never meant to wear." His servant, a mute named Elias, once caught him staring at a cracked mirror for hours, as though waiting for a different reflection to emerge, one that would confirm whether he was man, legend, or mistake. There were nights he would rise in his sleep, repeating phrases in Latin, French, and an older, cruder English, the voices of kings he'd never met but somehow remembered. One entry hastily scrawled, read, "Perhaps I am not the lie. Perhaps England is." Still, he resisted the inevitable. When the northern lords invited him to York to advise on the state of the realm, he declined. When rebels in Cornwall pledged their swords and their blood to him, he sent them bread instead of banners. And when a secret envoy from France offered ships, titles, and gold, he replied only with a single sentence: "A throne built on yearning will drown in it." But fate, like a predator, grows impatient when its prey does not run. In December, Edward VI died. Suddenly, though not surprisingly. Some claimed illness, others poison. None dared speak it aloud, but the name Thomas echoed through every corridor like a draft from a broken window. The boy king was gone, and with him, the fragile leash holding England's chaos at bay. The council panicked. With Mary Tudor exiled and Elizabeth hidden under Protestant suspicion, the realm had no anchor. Except the man outside Canterbury, the man who had not asked, but had already been anointed by the hearts of the many. Dudley, whose shadow had darkened every inch of power since Henry's death, made his move. He declared Lady Jane Grey the new monarch, despite her confusion, her terror, her youth. And all the while, Thomas wrote nothing, said nothing, only watched. But then came the letter. Its parchment was thin as onion skin, the wax red as coagulated blood. No seal, only a phrase etched in a hand no one could place. "If you are not king, then what are you?" 3 nights later, the manor burned. Witnesses claimed the flames rose without smoke, as though fire had grown impatient with oxygen. The air smelled not of wood, but of ink and parchment. Paper dreams turned to ash. They found no body, only a single boot, half melted, placed neatly at the center of the scorched floor. Thomas Grey was declared dead, but no grave was ever found. No bones, no remains. Only rumor, and rumor as it does, grew teeth. Some said he had faked his death and escaped to Florence. Others claimed he had been crowned in secret and now ruled from the shadows. A few believed he had never existed at all, that he was a hallucination born of collective guilt and royal fatigue. But in taverns and abbeys, among poets and beggars, a saying endured: "The king we lost was the only one who never asked to be found." In the Tower of London, Lady Jane Grey, now queen in title but prisoner in essence, carved a single name into the stone beside her bed. Not her own, not her husband's, only Thomas. Years passed, and the world, as it always does, grew weary of mystery. England turned its face toward new tyrants and new saints. The fires of reform burned what memory did not, and Thomas Grey, once whispered like a heresy, faded into the cracks between footnotes and superstition. Yet not entirely. In 1574, during Elizabeth's reign, a crypt was unearthed beneath a ruined chapel in Kent. Inside lay no coffin, only a chair, carved from dark yew, etched with a Tudor rose, split in two. On the wall behind it, scrawled in soot or dried blood, was a single sentence: "I wore the silence as my crown. There was no body." But on the arm of the chair hung a cloak, black lined in blue. It matched precisely the one described in paintings of a man who never officially existed. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, ordered the chamber sealed, then redacted. "Let the dead be myths," she said, "or they shall outlive the living. But the dead do not obey so easily." Here in Scotland, an aged monk recorded a final confession from a traveler dying of fever. The man claimed to be Thomas Gray, and in his ravings he spoke of kings who never reigned, and truths no crown could carry. "I was not the sun," he whispered, "but I was the echo, the shape that power casts when it forgets its origin." The monk, in fear or awe, did not press him further. The man died that night, clutching a coin worn smooth on one side. The other still bore the crude image of his face, eyes hollow from generations of belief. But perhaps the cruelest truth came not in legend, but in lineage. In 1601, a nobleman of obscure descent, Thomas Gray of Dorset, was executed for conspiring against Elizabeth I. His confession, preserved in trembling ink, included a passage dismissed at the time as madness. "I seek not revenge, but restoration. My blood is the same as his, though thinner. He was not my ancestor, but my burden." No historian connected the two. The names were too common, the dates too distant. But in the margins of an unpublished history, bound in calfskin and never released, one anonymous scholar scrawled a final theory. He was the king that the kingdom birthed by mistake, not to reign, but to remind. And that, perhaps, is the truest sentence ever written about Thomas Gray. For his was not a reign of years, but of memory, not a dynasty, but a wound. A phantom limb England could never quite stop reaching for, even centuries after the hand was gone. His face, or the idea of it, appears in strange places. An unnamed portrait in a Wiltshire manor, eyes too deep for its subject's supposed age. A stained-glass window in a ruined chapel, bearing no name but crowned with a halo of silence. In each, the same expression. Not sorrow, not pride, but recognition. As if he had seen our time before we lived it. Some say he was a liar, others a prophet, but the wisest say he was both. For what is prophecy if not the most beautiful kind of lie? And so the tale ends, or rather folds in on itself. Not with coronation, nor with execution, but with ambiguity. The only legacy tyrants cannot erase. He left no heir, no tomb, no proclamation, only a question. One that grows heavier with every generation that tries to answer it. What if the true king was the one who refused the throne? The wind carries his name not as a roar, but as a breath. And in that breath, history still listens,